All right. What is it that you do?
What do I do? Oh man, this is a great one. Um, Really, I just like figuring out how to move things places to get stuff done. I mean, yeah, it's pretty much as simple as that. That's why I love geospatial. I mean, a lot of it is about technology and how do we move bits from here to there and manipulate them. And it's moving towards big data. How do we train algorithms? But at the end of the day, you still need to collect data from the real world, which requires moving atoms and people and shooting sensors and waves at places in order to understand what's there and feed those servers and computers and processing power on the back end. So I help clients understand how do you move people to the right places at the right times in order to supply backlogs to um, drive continuous production and build mapping products and mapping data products for their customers. Yeah.
Do
So
people, when you say everything you just said, do people in the geospatial community understand what you just said?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think it depends on where you are in the value chain. I think there's a lot of folks in the community who are, you know, operating behind a computer, ArcGIS, QGIS, and all there's a whole host of different GIS softwares out there and visualization tools. But really, what my focus is how do we get the data in front of those people in the right formats, in the right time, in the right uh, current vintage, I guess. Make sure it's up to date. And how do we do that efficiently and profitably? And for me, that means erecting organizational systems around the collection and production of geospatial data. So it's everything from understanding what do our customers actually need from their data so that we can inform our collection teams, we can inform our sales teams, our marketing teams, our legal teams, and have everyone in the organization moving in concert. I mean, a label that I've bit avoided, but someone asked me the other day, and I was like, yeah, you know what? That is what I do. Is I essentially do geospatial management consulting. So how can we organize more efficiently to build geospatial data products that will be cost efficient and help end customers and users solve the problems that they're trying to solve?
Do geospatial companies or personnel or technicians or engineers, do they know that they're in geospatial? Like when they think in themselves in their role or their organization, are they like, hey, we're a geospatial company? Or do you use that term because it's an easy way for you to blanket an industry that you're like focused on?
Yeah, this is something. This is a super interesting observation. So when I got my start with Microsoft, right? And so our team was literally labeled in like our financial category as geospatial operations. And so that kind of cemented in my mind what we do. You know, we're organizing the aerial sensors that are strapped to airplanes and flying to collect imagery and LiDAR data from the air. We are deploying vehicle mounted sensors to collect LiDAR and imagery on the ground. And we're bringing all of that in and processing it through pipelines to produce mapping products that are geospatial products, right? But the interesting thing that gets back to your question is the Microsoft engineers that were developing those processing pipelines. I think if I were to guess, probably less than 25% of them thought of themselves as geospatial people. I think most of them thought of themselves
You're
as,
familiar with the term at least?
oh yeah, for sure. I mean, they knew that they were working in Bing Maps and that we were a geospatial organization, but they themselves identified as um, engineers, as programmers, as folks who are in technology. And so when we moved on from Bing Maps, a lot of them they continued in the geospatial industry, but a lot of them went on to do other things that were not geospatial, but were still focused on technology, like different types of program management, engineering, and different technology applications.
Do you think when you're talking to a group of engineers and geospatial people that utilizing jargon like geospatial is helping you or hurting you in getting your message across?
Um, for my target audience, they definitely know their geospatial, so I don't think it's hurting. And I mean, it is one of the biggest piece of criticisms that the industry is well aware of. And like, I'm helping organize a podcast right now for the National State Geospatial Information Council, which helps organize the geospatial offices in each state. And the podcast is all about the National Spatial Data Infrastructure, otherwise known as the NSDI. And that comes from the federal government, the Geospatial Data Act, the GDA, right? And so the industry is just laden with these technical acronyms and word soup, and people know that. And so in this podcast organization, we're constantly talking about how do we convey this message to not just the folks who are deeply embedded in the technology, but also folks who are in the ecosystem, but might not necessarily be as steeped or ingrained in the word salad of geospatial, right? So I think it's a good question for my target clients. They understand what I'm talking about, but for the people on the street, I think I say this pretty often. Geospatial, it's a double-edged sword. It's so critical to almost everything we do, and it's ingrained in almost every product that we consume or access at some point in that product's cycle is a map. Um, but if you ask people what geospatial is, most people have no clue what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So,
I think what's interesting to me from a marketing lens, a lot of these big salespeople these days, they say like your ad copy or your sales copy, it needs to be seventh grade reading level or lower, right? Like you don't want to try and sound overly verbose or have really intense like vocabulary in terms of how you're speaking. I find that in marketing, a lot of the posts I see, a lot of the people that I see that are out there, I personally feel like they use acronyms and they use jargon as a farce for not actually understanding what they're doing in some
yeah.
way. And I'm not saying that's you, but like I'll read a post and I'll be like, dude, I've been in marketing 10 years and all of a sudden I get a new acronym thrown at me and I'm like, okay, this acronym, what's crazy is like there's a couple acronyms in marketing, they all mean the same thing, right? There's myrrh, there's eROAS, there's like multiple things that all mean the same thing. It's like, why do you guys keep trying to invent things to make you sound smarter when realistically we have the same goal? We want to minimize expenses and maximize revenue while maintaining brand consistency, right? That's pretty much the goal of marketing for every organization. And so when we try and throw all these acronyms out there, sometimes one, I think it misleads clients. And to be fair, I used to do this when I first started my career, is when I would have a call with clients on FaceTime or just on the phone, I would try and overwhelm them with how smart I was so that they couldn't like challenge me or debate me or be upset, you
Yeah.
know? And then I realized like, okay, that's kind of a dick thing to do. Like it's better to have a conversation. It's better to make sure they understand what we're working to achieve. And it's better to point out like there are actually issues that I need to solve, right? Because if everything's hunky dory, why would I exist, right? And that's what I think a lot of business people don't understand is like they don't want to point out issues because they think the person on the other side is going to fire them or going to blame it on them. And it's like, dude, if you point out issues proactively, then you are doing them so much more of a service. Whereas if you're pointing out issues retroactively, that's slightly more of a disservice potentially.
Yeah, there's this weird thing, right? Because I totally understand where you're coming from, and that's exactly how I started out. And I think I creep into that space a little bit, trying to be the smartest one in the room, right? Show how competent and capable I am. Like you want me because I can solve your problems because I'm so smart. But at the end of the day, people don't like that. They want to work with someone who's humble, who obviously knows what they're talking about, but doesn't need to override the conversation. They don't need to. Um, bring in any preconceived notions. And that's something that I really try to do is, hey, let me ask a lot of questions. Like try to acknowledge from the outset, I'm not the technical guy. I'm not going to engineer your pipelines or anything like that. But what I will do is ask you and your team a ton of questions to understand what your objectives are, where sticking points are, what ideas people have on how things could be better, and how we can reorganize our teams so that communication flows more seamlessly, we're on track a little bit more towards what customers really want, and our messaging is on point from function to function, right? So my role is more of a, hey, let me canvas your organization and understand what's working well, what could be improved, and how can we get everyone in your team excited about what they're doing and excited about what other people on the team are doing so that they could better serve the organization as a whole, right? And so for me, that doesn't require a lot of technical expertise, although I do need to understand what they're talking about when they're using their technical language, right? There's a ton of just,
Yeah.
I mean, you could go on forever with all the acronyms and all of the different file formats and algorithm types and imagery types and sensor types and yada yada yada. But at the end of the day, what my job is okay, what is it that you really need, and how can we organize the people and the systems in your company to get that done?
You know what I think is interesting about questions is like I'm always a big question person, and I think the vast majority of people, realistically, whether they want to or not, they get offended when they're asked questions. They get very self-conscious and they get
Yeah,
defensive. And not when you're like one question, every couple days, but like I'm the type that I just ask questions nonstop because I want to learn more. It's not like I'm challenging them or think I'm smarter than them. It's I want to learn more. And I think in terms of helping people overcome some of that is when you are asking questions, it's not, hey, why are you doing this? Or what are you doing this for? It's not a challenge. The type of questions that you ask aren't from this pedestal where you're like super smart, smartest person in the room, right? It's you're actually asking questions that help people come up with the answers that they already had,
yeah,
right? It's not anything new. You're just kind of helping them find the path. You're already driving down the road. It's, hey, I already know where I'm going and I already know all of these things. I already know how to drive, but these questions help them find the path. And I think that's super critical when you're talking to people because I think when you're pitching, not you specifically, but when people pitch like, hey, I'm a consultant, I ask a lot of questions, people think, oh man, that's just more work for me, or this person's just going to come in and rip me a new asshole. Like, that's not what it's about. It's, I'm coming in and I'm asking you questions that you already know the answers to. You just maybe forgot or haven't thought about it in a while, or you just needed someone to help you kind of connect the dots a little bit more.
yeah, absolutely. I think it's a big part of it. And for me, it's like I don't, every organization is different. Every team, although you can have two teams, two businesses collecting aerial imagery for the same county at the same time, right? Because it's a big county. So they need multiple vendors working on the project. Well, each of those businesses could have completely different vision statements and missions and goals and objectives and values. And so for me, it's not a one size fit all. Oh, you're in this business, you need to operate this way. It's, hey, in order for me to help you, I need to understand your business. And and it there are two benefits to asking a lot of questions. The one that you just described is, hey, by me understanding my business and you teaching me about your business, you will also gain a clear understanding of your business. Even if you already understood it, now you're putting it into words that you can convey into messaging, branding, customer relationships, right? All sorts of different things. And then I can understand your business so that we can tailor and modify and customize solutions that are going to work for you and your team that might not work for a different team because they have a different way of doing things.
Yeah. Honestly, one of my favorite clients, he's actually one of my longest standing clients. Um, I'll talk to him for like 45 minutes to an hour just off a random phone call. These aren't scheduled calls. And these are my favorite conversations because he'll just start talking. He'll just start talking about like, hey, we were doing this job and on this job we did XYZ. And while he's talking, I'll ask him a couple questions. And the whole time I'm taking notes, right? And every single time that I'm taking notes, he's the business owner. He knows what he's doing. He's the one who crafted all these processes, right? And so while he's saying these things, I'm taking notes. I'm like, half of this stuff is not on your website. So then after the call, I take that and I put it on his website. The other half, it's like, this is great for running ads off of. You talked about interaction with the customer that was really positive, and we can mention this in your ads for potential customers. Or you talked about a negative interaction. How do we solve what caused this problem in the first place? Do we need to preemptively write information on your website where people understand a little bit more and have a frame of reference and kind of know what they're getting into? Or is this part of your, sales process or your invoicing process? Like, what's the issue here? And so, like, I feel like sometimes he might feel like he's rambling, but I love it because I just
Yeah.
get so much information because it's like I'm a marketer. I don't do his job. And I think a lot of people forget that. They want marketers that are only in one space, right? So it's like, hey, I'm a plumber. I only want a marketing agency that focuses on plumbers. No, that's not in your best interest because then you don't get all the learning lessons you get from working with a diverse set of clientele, right? We
Yeah.
don't need to be experts at plumbing, but having a plumbing expert talk to us and then taking our marketing expertise and combining those things, that's what really gets the amazing outcomes. So,
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's like I'm not an expert surveyor, right? But I work with surveying companies all the time because, I bring the in something that you said is so important. It's when you're in the thick of things, when you're in the day to day working on jobs, trying to finish these projects, just trying to drive that revenue and ship these products so that you can get paid, right? Your mind is focused and you're forgetting all these little things that add up in your business that make a big difference, right?
yep,
And so while sometimes it can feel like unnecessary to distract from the day-to-day operation of actually delivering the product or service, to take some time, reflect, bring the teams together, talk about what went well, what didn't go well, review the numbers. There's a cadence and a ritual in a business that is a business operating system. And there's a ton of them out there, right? There's like the EOS system, there's agile systems, there's so many different ways that you can run a business that work depending on how you like it. But the critical piece is taking some time on a regular basis to bring folks in from the outside, to canvas your employees, to get feedback, to take a little time to review what you're doing well, what you're not doing well, how you can improve, and then put those things back into the business and start working on them and taking action on them instead of just being laser focused on the function or the task that you have to do that day, right? So you got to
yep.
work these things, and that's something that I help my clients do.
I think the biggest thing is like hiring consultants isn't because you're doing something wrong. It's you can't see the forest through the trees. If you're so focused on what
Exactly.
you're doing and you've been in it for so long, it's hard to like get outside of yourself and look at things objectively, right? And this happens to me all the time. I'm a marketing expert, and there's some marketing mishaps or gaps in my own marketing that I'm like, someone is pointing them out to me. I'm like, oh my God, like this is so obvious. And I point this out to people all the time, but
Yeah.
because it's in my own business and I'm so focused on delivery rather than growing my own business sometimes, like it's super hard to see things without that external perspective.
Yeah. And one of my favorite examples of this kind of scenario, probably similar to you, because I know you love what you do at the end of the day, like digging into things and trying to figure out what the solution is. And so you get so focused on that, right? And so I had a client that I worked with who loved operating excavators. He just loved it. Like it was, if he could spend all day and all night operating excavators, and then when he was done going and riding bikes, like that's all he would do. Um, but because he loved just the motions of it so much, this is the business owner. He'd get on site and he'd start operating the excavator, and he would just get carried away on rolling one thing into another, right? But for me, he hired me to help with machine utilization and optimization, right? So we've got a bunch of machines on a job site. Not only do we need to know where they are, so we need to get that GPS data and feed it into the back end systems, but we need to start making sure that we're not spending more money on this equipment on site because some of it's rented than we need to. And so only certain people are qualified to operate certain pieces of equipment. And he just happened to be the only one qualified to operate the biggest, most expensive piece of equipment on the job that day. And there were other people qualified to operate the excavators, right? And so he got on site and he starts operating the excavator, and he's just having a blast, doing a great job, and he's great. I mean, he's better than anyone else at the excavator, but it's like, hey man, like you are doing something you love, and I get that, but let's take a step back. Like we need to get this large piece of equipment off site today. You're the only one who can operate it. Like you need to go and do that so that we don't spend so much money on that and we can all start pitching in and optimizing our labor force, right? And so it's when you're working with people who just love what they do, having that outside perspective to say, hey, you know what? Like, let's make time for what you love to do, but also optimize and maximize the value of your time in your business.
I think that's the biggest catch 22 of being an entrepreneur or being a business owner is you got into business most likely because you see things a certain way, you think you could do things better, or you want a certain level of freedom, right? And so as an entrepreneur, it's like, hey, I love to do this thing, I want to do this thing more, but at the same time, I want my business to grow. And so if I want my business to grow, at the end of the day, you really can't focus on delivery and some of these systems. You need to focus on management. You need to focus on delegation. You need to focus on general business operations. And so some of the things you used to love, it's like you need to make the decision of, hey, is it worth not growing my business for me to keep doing this thing that I love? Or is growing my business more important than me getting the satisfaction or fulfillment of doing this one thing? And
Yeah.
that's hard. I still struggle with that quite a bit, frankly.
Yeah, it's all about balance. It's all about balance because, I mean, peace, love, freedom. Love is right there in the middle, and you got to love what you do, right? And
Love it.
so
Yeah.
the thing that I mean, I try to operate my life like this is you got to find the balance, right? There's a certain amount of ice cream you can eat. There's a certain amount of running and working out that you need to do. There's a certain amount of chilling on the couch. There's a certain amount of just putting the nose to the grindstone and working hard, right? In order to be able to enjoy those other things. So it's not necessarily, hey, business owner, you need to stop doing the thing that you love doing so that you could do all these other things. I think it's critically important for business owners to regularly get out and continue to do those line level functions that are menial tasks, that are entry level, that are, you know, either physical or analytical to keep their whereabouts and understanding of how these different components of the business function so that you can empathize with your employees and you're much more willing to be receptive to feedback that will actually help propel that business forward, right? But it's
Thousand
all
percent.
about finding the balance and doing it in a measured, strategic way, not just let's just dive in and keep the blinders on because I love this one thing and I don't want to do anything else.
Yeah, I think so many business owners forget what it's like to be in the trenches. And it's like, okay, I get you've evolved, you have different priorities, you want the business to grow, and sometimes you have to focus on things from a very numerical or kind of boring standpoint. But this at the same time, it's like your business will not succeed unless your best people stick with you, right? You don't employee churn is a massive cost that organizations don't factor into their business a lot of times. And it's like if you focus on what it's like to be in the trenches and get in there every now and then and work through those processes, one, you can figure out how to optimize them a little bit better, right? But two, you can empathize with people a lot more. So I think, yeah, I think that's huge. That was one of the biggest reasons why broke off and started my own business. I think a lot of people do that, and then eventually they forget because again, they're just so focused on their path that they kind of forget where they came from. So
Yeah.
cool, man. This is